December in Delhi is a time of biting cold and short, grey days. It was on one of those cold, dark nights, the 16th of December 2012, that a crime of incomprehensible brutality occurred. An act so vicious it would rip through the conscience of a nation, sparking protests, legal reforms, and a global reckoning. This is the story of Nirbhaya, the fearless one, the pseudonym given to the young woman whose death exposed a deep, festering wound in the heart of India's capital. Our story begins not with the crime itself, but with the hope and ambition that pulsed within the victim. She was a 23-year-old physiotherapy intern, bright, determined, and full of the quiet confidence of someone building a better life. She came from a modest background, her father working diligently at the airport to support the family. She was their pride, her success a testament to their sacrifices and her own hard work. She had recently finished her exams and was looking forward to a promising career. She represents the millions of young women across India who migrate to large cities like Delhi, the bustling metropolis, seeking education, work, and an escape from the stricter confines of traditional life. Delhi, the national capital territory, is a city of sharp contrasts, soaring modernity set against ancient history, immense wealth beside crippling poverty, and the promise of opportunity shadowed by stark, often brutal realities. The relationship between women and public spaces in Delhi has long been fraught. Despite its cosmopolitan veneer, the city had already earned a notorious reputation, often being tragically nicknamed the rape capital of India due to its alarmingly high rate of crimes against women. For many women, taking public transport, walking home alone after dark, or even traversing crowded streets required a constant, exhausting vigilance. The cultural backdrop is complex, rooted in deeply entrenched patriarchal norms where discussions about sexual violence are often shrouded in silence, blame is frequently shifted to the victim, and the pace of justice is glacial. It was into this charged and complicated environment that our victim and her 28-year-old male friend, a software engineer who had gone to the movies with her, stepped that fateful night. It was a Sunday. The pair had spent the evening at a multiplex cinema at the Select City Walk Mall in Saket, a popular upscale shopping centre in South Delhi. The film they watched, Life of Pi, was a tale of survival, hope, and faith in the face of insurmountable odds, a bitter irony given what was about to unfold. The time was late, around 9:30 p.m. As they left the mall, they headed to a bus stand. Buses are the lifeline of Delhi, a sprawling, congested city of nearly 17 million people, but as the night deepens, their frequency and reliability diminish drastically. The two friends intended to take a bus to their destination in Dwarka. They waited, growing anxious as the minutes ticked by and the cold deepened. Eventually, a white, private chartered bus approached. It was unmarked and had dark curtains, an unusual sight for a public transport bus, but it looked operational. Crucially, the bus was almost empty, appearing to be one of the late-night off-duty or chartered services sometimes used by commuters desperate to get home. It was being driven by a man named Ram Singh, a relatively slight figure who was the main conspirator and the ringleader of the group. As the bus stopped, the driver, Ram Singh, and his brother Mukesh Singh, who was serving as a helper or cleaner on the bus, beckoned the two friends aboard. They agreed on a fare, and the friends climbed the steep steps into the dimly lit interior. Inside, the circumstances immediately began to feel wrong. Besides the driver and the helper, there were 4 other men on the bus. Vinay Sharma, a gym assistant, Pawan Gupta, a fruit seller, Akshay Thakur, who had just arrived in Delhi and worked odd jobs, and a juvenile, a young boy who was also employed as a cleaner or helper on the bus. All 6 men were clustered at the back, their eyes fixed on the new passengers. The interior of the bus was not the typical setting for a night out. It was a vehicle used for school transport during the day, which meant it was not designed for late-night service and lacked the standard public safety measures. The men aboard were not passengers. They were the crew and their friends. 6 young men who were drunk and cruising the streets with sinister intent. As the bus began to move, the men's behavior quickly escalated from merely unnerving too overtly hostile. They began to verbally harass the young woman, shouting lewd remarks and insults. When the male friend courageously stood up to object to the verbal abuse, the situation exploded into savage violence. Ram Singh, the driver, pulled the bus to the side of the road in a desolate, poorly lit area near the Munirka district. The remaining 5 men launched a brutal physical assault on the young man. They attacked him with an iron rod, beating him mercilessly until he was subdued, bleeding profusely, and incapacitated. The violence was not merely a reaction, it was a preemptive, deliberate move to remove the only physical barrier protecting the young woman. What followed next was a sustained, horrific ordeal that lasted for approximately 1 hour, all while the bus continued to drive through the streets of South Delhi. The driver, Ram Singh, kept the bus in motion, sometimes speeding, sometimes slowing, effectively using the vehicle as a mobile chamber of torture, its dark windows and curtains shielding the unspeakable acts from the outside world. The men, one after another, subjected the young woman to repeated sexual assault and extreme physical abuse. The cruelty was systematic, calculated, and designed to inflict the maximum possible pain and degradation. The iron rod used to beat her friend became one of the instruments of her torture, used internally to inflict grievous, irreparable injuries. During this nightmare hour, the bus passed through several checkpoints and was even momentarily stopped for checking by a Delhi police constable. But the men managed to evade detection. The police officer, satisfied with a quick glance through the driver's window, waved the bus on, unaware of the horror unfolding just feet away. This failure of the system, the casual, almost indifferent lack of scrutiny, would become one of the many points of furious contention during the later public protests. The attackers' motivation appeared to be a complex cocktail of intoxication, deeply ingrained misogyny, and a sickening sense of entitlement. In the aftermath of the case, police and psychological investigators suggested that their actions were driven by a perverse desire for power and control, a warped form of social protest against women who dared to be out late and independent in what they viewed as their territory. The brutality reached its climax when the men, seemingly believing they had killed both victims, decided to dump the bodies. Around 10:45 p.m., the bus stopped on a deserted stretch of road near an area known as Mahipalpur. The 2 grievously injured, bleeding and barely conscious victims were stripped of their clothing and flung from the moving bus onto the cold roadside. The men then drove away, attempting to destroy any clothing and evidence of the heinous act. The irony of the location was stark. They were discarded near the highway leading toward the Indira Gandhi International Airport, the very place where the victim's father worked, a symbol of the global aspirations that Delhi was supposed to represent. Lying in the dust and the cold, the male friend, despite his devastating injuries, managed to crawl to his friend and attempt to rouse her. A passerby, a man on a bicycle, initially ignored them, hesitant to get involved. A common fear in a city where assisting crime victims can lead to lengthy police questioning and bureaucratic entanglement. Eventually, however, another man, a local farmer, stopped and called the police, who arrived shortly after, along with an ambulance. The young woman was rushed to Safdarjung Hospital in Delhi, her condition immediately categorized as extremely critical. Doctors were horrified by the extent of her internal injuries. They were so severe that they later necessitated the removal of most of her internal organs. This level of injury indicated an attack meant not just to rape, but to systematically destroy. The immediate medical response was a frantic effort to save her life. She was stable enough to give a statement to the subdivisional magistrate, repeating the horrifying details of the assault. She spoke with a clear, calm resolve, her account providing the crucial initial evidence needed to launch a massive manhunt. The scale of the crime was not immediately apparent to the public. It began as a small news item, a simple case of a brutal assault. But within days, as the gravity of the injuries and the chilling details of the bus crew's actions leaked to the media, the story began to consume the city. The police were under immediate and immense pressure to catch the perpetrators. The investigation was launched with a speed and intensity rarely seen in India's often slow-moving judicial system. The first breakthrough came from tracing the vehicle itself. The eyewitnesses, The male friend and later the victim herself had provided a detailed description of the white bus, its curtains, and its unusual charter markings. The police began to track down all private buses that fit the description and were known to operate in South Delhi on that route late at night. They quickly zeroed in on the bus owner, who provided the name of the primary driver, Ram Singh. Within 72 hours of the crime, Ram Singh was located and arrested from his slum dwelling in the Ravidas camp area of Delhi. His capture was only the first domino. Ram Singh quickly confessed and provided the names and whereabouts of his accomplices. The investigation moved with unprecedented efficiency, a direct result of the building public fury. The police sweep located and arrested his brother, Mukesh Singh, the helper, and 3 other adults: Vinay Sharma, Pawan Gupta, and Akshay Thakur. The 6th and final suspect, the juvenile, was apprehended shortly after. The arrests brought a temporary sense of relief, but they also ignited a deep, visceral rage among the populace. The fact that the perpetrators were a group of seemingly ordinary men, a driver, a cleaner, a fruit seller, who were operating a public transport vehicle to commit such a heinous crime, shattered the fragile trust in the city's safety. The sheer impunity with which the crime was committed, driving through the city's streets as if they owned them and its inhabitants, was an intolerable affront. As the arrested men were being interrogated, the young woman, given the symbolic name Nirbhaya, meaning fearless, continued her desperate fight for life in the hospital. Her struggle became a mirror for the nation's struggle for justice and safety. But the battle was not hers alone. It was about to become a national uprising. The media's relentless coverage and social media's rapid spread of information ensured that this was not a crime that could be quietly forgotten. The details of the brutality, which were shocking in their medieval cruelty, spurred an immediate and unprecedented public reaction that went far beyond the typical vigils and silent protests. The people of Delhi, and soon the entire country, were no longer asking for justice. They were demanding it, loudly, angrily, and in the thousands. The protests began almost immediately after the arrests, escalating rapidly from quiet candle marches to massive confrontational demonstrations. Thousands descended upon the India Gate, the central hub of the city, and the Rashtrapati Bhavan, the residence of the President of India. The anger was directed not just at the 6 men, but at the entire system: the police, the government, the courts, and the entrenched social attitudes that allowed such violence to persist. Young men and women stood shoulder to shoulder, braving the tear gas and water cannons deployed by the police, their voices unified in a single, powerful roar for change. This was more than a protest about a single crime. It was an intersectional movement challenging deep-seated patriarchy, judicial apathy, and political inaction. The young woman's fight continued. Her condition, however, was deteriorating rapidly. Despite the heroic efforts of the doctors at Safdar Jung, her injuries were catastrophic. Recognizing the limits of local care, the government, under immense public pressure, decided to airlift her to the Mount Elizabeth Hospital in Singapore, hoping specialized treatment could save her. This move, however, was criticized by some as a politically motivated measure, a desperate attempt to show action and potentially manage the outcome away from the volatile streets of Delhi. She was flown to Singapore on the morning of December 27th, 15 days after the assault. The whole nation held its breath, praying for a miracle. But the transfer was too little, too late. Her body, ravaged by infection and the systematic internal destruction, was simply beyond repair. Her fight ended 2 days later, on the 29th of December, 2012. The announcement of her death plunged the country into a profound grief that instantly transformed into a volcanic, uncontrollable rage. The passing of Nirbhaya cemented her status not merely as a victim, but as a symbol, the face of every woman who had ever suffered in silence, and the catalyst for a fundamental, legal, and social overhaul. Her body was flown back to Delhi, and she was cremated under a heavy cloak of security in the early morning hours to prevent the funeral from turning into an even larger site of protest. The government was trying desperately to regain control of a narrative and a street movement that had spiraled far beyond their authority, but her death was the beginning of the real reckoning. Now, the 6 men, the perpetrators, faced not just the court of law, but the court of a seething, unforgiving public opinion. The investigation was over, the trial was about to begin, and the world was watching. The trial of the 6 men arrested for the assault and murder of the young physiotherapist began almost immediately, propelled by the unstoppable force of public demand. The entire nation was fixated on the proceedings, viewing the court as the battleground for a larger war against systemic violence and injustice. This was not a trial that would be allowed to fade into the background of India's congested judicial calendar. The case was fast-tracked and assigned to a special court. The evidence against the accused was overwhelming, meticulously gathered by the Delhi police under intense scrutiny. Key elements included the identification of the bus, the corroborating testimony of the male friend, and, crucially, the dying declaration made by Nirbhaya herself at Safdarjung Hospital, detailing the horror she endured and naming her attackers. Forensic evidence, including DNA samples recovered from the victims and the bus, cemented the link between the accused and the crime scene. The 6 men were separated into 2 groups for trial. 5 of the adults, Ram Singh, the driver, Mukesh Singh, his brother, Vinay Sharma, Pawan Gupta, and Akshay Thakur, were to be tried in a sessions court. The 6th accused, the juvenile, was directed to the Juvenile Justice Board, a distinction that would become one of the most contentious points of the entire legal process. Under Indian law at the time, a juvenile was defined as anyone under the age of 18, and regardless of the severity of the crime, they could only be sentenced to a maximum of 3 years in a correctional facility. The immense public outrage argued that the brutality of this particular crime demanded that age be superseded by the nature of the act. The initial atmosphere surrounding the accused was marked by defiance and a shocking lack of remorse. The statements of the men, particularly Mukesh Singh, who later gave interviews while incarcerated, revealed a mindset chilling in its patriarchal dismissal of the victim. They expressed a perverse sense of justification, essentially blaming the victim for being out late and for resisting their advances, a classic toxic trope in sexual violence cases. This served only to further inflame public sentiment. However, the legal proceedings themselves were quickly impacted by a dramatic turn of events. On March 11, 2013, less than 3 months after the crime, Ram Singh, the principal driver and ringleader of the group, was found dead in his cell in Tihar Jail, Delhi's high-security prison. Prison authorities officially ruled the death a suicide by hanging. The news created another wave of shock and speculation. Given the high-profile nature of the case and the intense public desire for all the accused to face justice, theories of foul play immediately circulated. However, after detailed inquiries, the official verdict of suicide was maintained, leaving the remaining 4 adult accused to stand trial for murder, gang rape, kidnapping, and destruction of evidence. The defense strategies were desperate and ultimately flimsy. Lawyers for the accused attempted to discredit the dying declaration, arguing that Nirbhaya was not in a fit state to give a coherent account. They also attempted to shift blame to the male friend, suggesting he had failed to protect her. These arguments, however, collapsed under the weight of the forensic evidence and the unwavering, detailed account given by the male friend, who testified as the crucial eyewitness and survivor. His courage in reliving the horrific events provided the bedrock of the prosecution's case. The trial was conducted with remarkable speed. The judges heard the evidence, reviewed hundreds of pages of documentation, and examined over 80 witnesses. The prosecution, acutely aware of the national spotlight, meticulously built a case demonstrating the joint intention and depraved nature of the crime, that the men had not just reacted violently, but had intended to humiliate, torture, and ultimately kill the victims to ensure their silence. On September 10, 2013, the Sessions Court delivered its verdict for the 4 remaining adult accused, Mukesh Singh, Vinay Sharma, Pawan Gupta, and Akshay Thakur. All 4 men were found guilty on all counts, including gang rape and murder. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the ruling, but outside, a sense of grim, temporary satisfaction swept through the watching crowds. 3 days later, the court addressed the sentencing. The prosecution argued for the death penalty, calling the crime the rarest of rare cases, a category reserved for crimes so heinous that they shock the conscience of society. The judge agreed, describing the actions of the 4 men as a beastly and fiendish act that warranted no mercy. The 4 convicts were sentenced to death by hanging. While the adults faced the ultimate penalty, the proceedings involving the juvenile concluded earlier. On August 31, 2013, the Juvenile Justice Board found him guilty of rape and murder. As per the existing law, he was sentenced to 3 years in a special observation home. He was released in December 2015 upon completion of his sentence. The disparity in punishment, the death penalty for the adults versus a 3-year sentence for a young man found equally culpable in the brutal assault, fueled the second major wave of public protest. The outcry forced a direct and immediate legislative review. The political and social pressure was immense and relentless. The public was demanding not just justice for one victim, but a systemic change to ensure future safety. In response to the unprecedented fury, the Indian Parliament moved swiftly. An investigative committee, led by former Chief Justice J.S. Verma, was formed within days of the incident to propose amendments to the existing laws. The outcome was the passage of the Criminal Law Amendment Act 2013, often referred to as the Nirbhaya Act. This legislation was revolutionary. It introduced far stricter punishments for sexual offences, including the death penalty for repeat offenders or for cases where the assault results in the victim's death or leaves her in a vegetative state. It also expanded the legal definition of sexual assault to include acts other than penetration, criminalised stalking and voyeurism, and critically, changed the legal age of consent from 16 to 18 years. Furthermore, it established fast-track courts to ensure that sexual assault cases did not languish in the system for years, a major victory for the protesters. The public debate around the juvenile's sentencing eventually led to another significant legal change. The Juvenile Justice, Care and Protection of Children's Act, 2015. This act lowered the age at which a juvenile could be tried as an adult for heinous offences from 18 to 16, provided the Juvenile Justice Board deems the crime and the accused's maturity warrant it. The impact of Nirbhaya's case was now etched into the very fabric of India's legal code. The legal journey for the 4 adult convicts, however, was far from over. India's judicial system allows for multiple layers of appeal in death penalty cases. The verdict was first challenged in the Delhi High Court, which upheld the death sentences in March 2014, calling the crime tuttiest in the history of judicial system. The convicts then appealed to the final judicial authority, the Supreme Court of India. It was during these years of appeal, from 2014 to 2017, that the initial intensity of the public rage began to subside, replaced by a grim, persistent demand for finality. The delays were painful for the victim's family, who had become the enduring public face of resilience against the protracted legal process. In May 2017, the Supreme Court delivered its final major judgment, comprehensively upholding the death sentences. The bench described the case as falling in the rarest of rare category, emphasizing the desire to wreak vengeance on the victim and the carnage of the highest degree that had occurred. The final legal recourse remaining for the convicts was the curative petition and the mercy petition to the President of India. The legal maneuvers of the convicts and their lawyers dragged on for another 3 years, each procedural delay creating renewed frustration across the country. One by one, their curative petitions were rejected by the Supreme Court. Finally, the 4 men submitted mercy petitions to the President of India, seeking commutation of their death sentences to life imprisonment. The President rejected all 4 mercy petitions. The legal road had run out. For the first time since the crime occurred, there was a date set for the execution, March 20th, 2020. The execution was carried out at 5:30 a.m. at Tihar Jail. The four remaining adult perpetrators, Mukesh Singh, Vinay Sharma, Pawan Gupta, and Akshay Thakur, were hanged simultaneously. The hanging brought a stark, final closure to the legal chapter of the case. Outside the jail, a crowd had gathered in the cold pre-dawn darkness, waiting for the news. When the announcement was made, a spontaneous cheer erupted. It was a complex moment, not one of pure celebration, but of profound relief that after over 7 years the promise of justice had finally been fulfilled. The quiet dawn execution marked the end of a long, arduous legal chapter, but the story of Nirbhaya, the fearless one, was far from over. Her name, a pseudonym conferred by the media to protect her identity, had transcended its origin. It was no longer just the moniker of a victim. It had become a national war cry, a symbol carved into India's collective memory, forever standing for the brutal cost of apathy and the fierce demand for change. The true enduring impact of the 2012 crime lay not just in the punishment meted out to the 6 men, but in the seismic cultural and legislative shifts it violently forced upon the nation. Prior to 2012, conversations around sexual violence were often conducted in hushed tones, burdened by victim blaming, shame, and the pervasive fear that reporting an assault would only lead to further humiliation. The widespread public fury unleashed by Nirbhaya's case shattered that culture of silence. It dragged the uncomfortable truths of patriarchy and misogyny out of the shadows and onto the streets. The Criminal Law Amendment Act 2013, the Nirbhaya Act, stands as her most immediate and tangible legacy. This legislation, passed under intense public pressure and directly fueled by the horror of her assault and her courageous dying declaration, fundamentally rewrote India's rape laws. It redefined terms, established harsher penalties, and created mechanisms for faster trials. Her suffering and her ultimate death were the sacrificial catalyst that ensured these laws were not merely drafted, but swiftly enacted. Without the visceral shock and the sustained outrage following her death, it is highly unlikely that such sweeping and rapid reform would have occurred. Beyond the statutes, the case created a profound shift in public consciousness. It sparked widespread discussions in schools, families, and public forums about consent, gender equality, and the responsibility of men in ensuring women's safety. It led to the establishment of one-stop centers for victims of violence across the country and pushed for greater public funding towards measures aimed at women's safety, including better street lighting, increased police patrols, and dedicated women's helplines. However, the laws are merely a framework, and societal change is a generational struggle. Despite the strictures of the Nirbhaya Act, similar horrific crimes continue to be reported with depressing regularity across India. The case of the Unnao victim, or the Hyderabad vet, are just 2 later examples that prove that while the law may have changed, the deep-seated societal issues, the misogynistic mindset, the administrative failure, and the institutional sexism remain fiercely resistant to eradication. The fight ignited on that cold December night in 2012, therefore, remains an ongoing battle. At the heart of this enduring fight is Nirbhaya's family. They refused to fade into quiet grief. Her mother in particular became a relentless and powerful public advocate. She channeled her unbearable loss into a tireless crusade, campaigning for education, women's rights, and the unwavering pursuit of justice for other victims. She attends court hearings, delivers powerful speeches, and meets with other grieving families, transforming their private tragedy into a public, inspirational mission. The family's constant presence in the public sphere ensures that the promise made to their daughter, that her death would not be in vain, is continually challenged and upheld. They became the moral compass for the nation's progress on this issue. The reverberations of the Nirbhaya case were not contained by India's borders. The incident received intense and sustained global media coverage, sparking international conversations about sexual violence, women's safety in public spaces, and the often lax legal and social responses to these crimes in developing nations. It put the spotlight squarely on the challenges of achieving gender parity and safety in a rapidly modernizing society still grappling with regressive cultural norms. The global outrage served as a powerful external pressure. reinforcing the demand for institutional accountability within India. Ultimately, the story of the 2012 Delhi bus gang rape case is a paradox of despair and hope. It is a story of the most profound human cruelty, but also one of extraordinary social courage. It is a testament to the raw, visceral power of a collective society when it finally decides to reject the intolerable. The victim, the young physiotherapy intern who dreamed of a career and a better life, did not survive the attack. But her sacrifice ignited a fire that continues to burn in the soul of the nation. Her death became a dark, unavoidable mirror, forcing every citizen to look upon the darkest parts of their society and demand a fundamental, moral reckoning. The execution of her killers provided legal finality, but the true legacy of the fearless one is the ongoing movement for change that she inspired. Her life was violently cut short, but her death gave birth to an undeniable awakening. That night, it wasn't only a girl who died. An entire nation awoke.